The stars shone brightly above the dense jungle of the alien planet, their light barely making it through the thick canopy of strange trees. Ethan Carter, a human engineer, sat inside his broken-down ship, sweating and cursing under his breath. He had never expected his deep space mining expedition to go this wrong. The ship's controls were dead, and the communication system was a mess. His only option now was to wait for help, but that could take days, if help ever came at all. Ethan looked around. The planet was beautiful, but there was something strange about it. The trees were tall and twisted, their leaves glowing faintly in the dark. The air smelled fresh, but there was an eerie silence that surrounded him, broken only by the occasional rustle in the distance. He tried to calm his racing heart, but it was hard. His mind kept racing with questions. Who lived on this planet? Was he alone? Before he could think further, there was a loud noise in the trees, something moving fast. Ethan stood up quickly, his eyes darting around. Suddenly, he saw them, figures, tall and strong, moving through the forest with ease. Their bodies were covered in armor that shimmered in the faint light, and their eyes glowed with an unsettling intensity. These weren't ordinary creatures. They were alien. Ethan froze, unsure of what to do. Should he hide or try to communicate? He didn't know who they were, but they were clearly not human. One of them, a woman much taller than him, stepped forward. Her eyes locked onto his, sharp and calculating. She was a warrior, with strong muscles and a presence that made Ethan feel small. "Who are you?" she asked in a deep voice, though the language was strange to him. He could somehow understand. Ethan hesitated. I'm a human," he said, his voice shaky. "My ship crashed here. I don't mean any harm." The warrior woman studied him carefully, her gaze never leaving him. She stepped closer, towering over him. Her eyes scanned his body, his clothes, and the damaged ship behind him. Ethan could feel the tension in the air, and his palms began to sweat. "Human," the woman repeated. She seemed almost puzzled, as if the word was unfamiliar to her. "I've heard stories about your kind, but I never believed them. You look different." Ethan swallowed nervously. "I don't know what stories you've heard, but I'm just a regular man. Please, I need help. My ship is broken. Can you help me?" For a moment, there was silence. The woman turned to the others behind her. They, too, were tall and powerful, their expressions unreadable. They exchanged a few words in their own language, and then the woman spoke again, her voice much softer than before. "You are alone?" she asked, almost in disbelief. Ethan nodded. "I'm alone. My crew, there was an accident. I'm the only one who made it." The woman narrowed her eyes, clearly processing his words. "We will take you to our leader. You are a curiosity. You will be questioned." Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but he could see the determination in her eyes. It was clear that arguing wouldn't change anything. He'd have to go with them, but he couldn't help but feel a pang of fear. What would they do to him? These alien warriors didn't seem like the type to show mercy. He had no choice. As they led him through the dense jungle, Ethan couldn't stop himself from wondering about the people who had found him. They didn't seem hostile. At least not yet, but the way they moved, the way they held themselves, it was obvious that they were strong, skilled, and used to danger. The journey through the jungle was silent. The warriors moved like shadows, swift and quiet, their eyes always scanning their surroundings. Ethan struggled to keep up, but they never seemed to notice his struggles. They were used to this. When they finally reached their destination, Ethan's breath caught in his throat. The clearing ahead was dominated by a large stone structure, something that looked ancient yet functional. There were no signs of modern technology here, only the stone, covered in strange markings that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. The woman in the front turned to him. "This is our stronghold. You will wait here." Ethan looked around, his heart pounding. This place felt alive, like it had been standing for centuries, watching. What kind of people lived here? What kind of warriors were these? Before he could ask another question, the woman motioned to the others, and they disappeared into the shadows of the stronghold, leaving Ethan alone in the clearing. He sat on a stone bench, trying to calm his nerves, but his thoughts raced. Who were these alien women? And what did they want with him? Would they help him fix his ship, or would he become a prisoner in their strange world? One thing was certain: Ethan's life would never be the same again. Ethan sat in the stone clearing, his hands resting on his lap, his mind racing with questions. The large stone structure in front of him felt ancient, its walls covered in glowing symbols that seemed to shift in the low light. He wondered what kind of people lived here and why they had found him. He'd never imagined meeting aliens, let alone being surrounded by a group of them. After what seemed like an eternity, the warrior woman who had first found him reappeared. She walked toward him, her armor gleaming in the soft light of the clearing. Her long, dark hair flowed behind her, and her presence felt commanding. She was tall, even taller than Ethan had first realized, with an air of authority that made him feel small in comparison. "You are still here," she said, her voice steady and strong, though there was a hint of curiosity in her tone now. "I thought you might try to escape." Ethan shook his head. "No, I'm not trying to escape. I'm just waiting. I don't know what else to do." The woman studied him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You are not like the others. I sense no fear in you." "Why?" Ethan didn't know how to answer. He wasn't sure why he wasn't afraid. Maybe it was the fact that he had nothing to lose, or maybe it was the strange feeling that these warriors didn't want to harm him. Not yet. At least. "I guess I'm just trying to figure out what's going on." The woman tilted her head slightly, her expression thoughtful. "You do not fear us. Most would. But you are calm, even when faced with the unknown." Interesting. Ethan didn't know how to respond to that, so he stayed quiet. She took a step closer, her gaze never leaving him. "I am Zira. I lead the warriors of this land. You will speak with our elders soon. They will decide what to do with you." Zira's tone was matter-of-fact, but Ethan noticed a flicker of something in her eyes, a spark of curiosity, maybe. She wasn't as cold as she had seemed when they first met. Ethan gave her a nod. "Thank you for not killing me," he said, trying to lighten the mood. Zira raised an eyebrow. "Why would we kill you? You are not a threat to us." "Well, I'm not exactly useful, am I? I don't even know how to fix my ship," Ethan admitted, rubbing his temples in frustration. "I was hoping someone might be able to help me get it back up and running." Zira's eyes softened for a brief moment, though she quickly masked it with her usual serious demeanor. "Perhaps we can help you, but first, we need to know more. Tell me, what is your purpose here? Why did your ship crash on our world?" Ethan paused. He knew this was a crucial moment. How much should he share? He didn't know if he could trust these warriors completely, but if he wanted their help, he needed to be honest. "I'm part of a mining expedition. We were looking for rare minerals, deep in space. Something went wrong, and I ended up here. Alone." Zira studied him for a moment longer. A miner, from the stars. She seemed to find that concept fascinating. "Your people are not like us, yet you look similar. I do not understand." Ethan smiled a little. "I guess we're not that different after all. Humans may not be warriors, but we have our own ways of surviving." Zira took a step back, her gaze still fixed on him. "I will call for our elders. They will want to speak with you. You may rest until then." Before Ethan could reply, Zira turned and walked back toward the stone structure, her footsteps silent on the ground. Ethan watched her go, his mind still spinning. He had no idea what was coming next, but one thing was clear: Zira wasn't like the warriors he had imagined. There was something about her that made him think she wasn't entirely convinced that humans were inferior to her kind. As the sun began to set, the jungle around Ethan grew quieter, and the sky darkened. The stars above seemed even more distant now, as if reminding him of how far he truly was from Earth. He couldn't help but wonder if he would ever make it back home. An hour later, Zira returned with two others, both women dressed in similar armor. One of them, a tall warrior with striking silver hair, stepped forward and spoke in a language that Ethan couldn't understand. Zira translated, her voice steady but laced with a hint of curiosity. "The elders wish to know more about you. They are fascinated by your kind," she said. Ethan felt his heart race. This was it, the moment that would decide his fate. He stood up, his legs still a little shaky from the long hours of sitting, and followed Zira into the stone structure. As they entered, Ethan was struck by the grandeur of the place. The walls were covered in intricate carvings, and strange lights pulsed softly from the ceiling, illuminating the hall in a mysterious glow. It was nothing like he had ever seen on Earth. Zira led him to the center of the hall, where a group of elders stood waiting. Their eyes were sharp, like Zira's, and their gazes seemed to pierce right through him. They said nothing as they looked him over, but Ethan could feel their intense curiosity. Zira turned to him. "Speak," she said simply. "Tell them more about your people." Ethan took a deep breath. This was his chance to make an impression, to prove that he wasn't just a helpless human. And maybe, just maybe, he could earn their trust. Ethan stood in the center of the stone hall, surrounded by the alien women who seemed to tower over him. His heart raced as their sharp eyes scanned him, their gaze unwavering. The elders, draped in robes of shimmering material that seemed to ripple with light, were silent. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. He felt a wave of pressure, but he forced himself to stand tall. Zira, standing by his side, nodded at him to speak. "Tell them about your people, your planet. Why are you here?" Ethan swallowed hard, unsure where to start. He had to choose his words carefully. These were the elders, the leaders of the warriors. If he said the wrong thing, it could mean danger. But if he didn't speak at all, it might mean he would remain a mystery, and that could also be dangerous. He took a deep breath and began, his voice steady but carrying the weight of uncertainty. "I'm from Earth, a planet far away from here. We are a young species, still growing and learning. We're explorers, always seeking new places and new knowledge." He glanced at the elders, noticing the intensity of their attention. "I was part of a crew that went into deep space. We were searching for resources to help our planet, but something went wrong. My ship was damaged, and I ended up here alone." The silence in the hall was deafening as the elders absorbed his words. Zira stood still, her arms crossed, watching him closely. One of the elders, an older woman with silver hair and glowing violet eyes, stepped forward. Her voice was soft, but carried a weight that made Ethan's skin tingle. "You claim to be an explorer, but your people have no power to travel the stars as we do. How do you explain this?" The elder's voice was sharp, but not unkind. Ethan hesitated for a moment. He knew what she was referring to. Humans hadn't mastered the technology to travel beyond their own solar system. At least, not to the extent these alien women had. But he had to explain it somehow. We've only just begun exploring space. Our technology is still developing. But we have discovered a way to travel faster than light, though we still have much to learn. Our journey was an attempt to find new resources, a way to help our planet grow and survive." Another elder, a tall woman with long golden hair, raised her hand, signaling for silence. "You say you are explorers, but you are not like us. You are not warriors, not like those who walk this planet. What use could you have for the stars?" Ethan's mind raced. He understood their skepticism. Humans weren't known for their physical strength or warrior culture. They were more about intellect and resourcefulness. But he couldn't say that out loud. Instead, he chose to focus on something that he knew would resonate with them: survival. "We may not be warriors, but we are survivors," Ethan said, his voice gaining confidence. "We fight in our own way, through our minds, our creativity. Humans don't give up easily. We find ways to make things work, even when everything seems impossible." The elder with violet eyes looked at him thoughtfully, her expression softening for the first time. "You fight in your own way," she repeated, her tone more curious than dismissive. "You rely on your minds instead of strength." Ethan nodded. "Yes, we don't have the physical power that you do, but we make up for it with our ingenuity. We build, we adapt, we create. We've learned to survive against the odds." There was a moment of silence as the elders exchanged glances. They didn't speak for what felt like forever, but Ethan could see the wheels turning in their minds. They were weighing his words carefully. Zira stepped forward, her eyes locked on his, still skeptical, but there was something else in them now. Something more than just suspicion. "Tell us more," she said, "about your kind, about how you survive without the strength to protect yourselves." Ethan took a deep breath. He had to show them that there was more to humans than just their lack of physical power. "We protect each other," he began. "Our strength lies in our unity. Humans work together to overcome the challenges we face. We share our knowledge, our resources, and our skills. We learn from one another, and that's how we grow stronger." The elder with violet eyes spoke again, her voice softer now. "You believe that your people can become strong enough to stand against us." Ethan nodded. "We might not be able to fight like you, but we've learned to face challenges in our own way. And we've learned that the strength of one doesn't matter as much as the strength of many working together." The elder seemed to consider his words for a long time. Then, finally, she spoke. "Your words are interesting, human. You do not fight with weapons or strength, but you fight with your minds and your will. That is not a weakness. We will not dismiss you so quickly." Zira turned to the other elders, her voice firm. "I believe this human has more to teach us than we first realized. Perhaps there is more to their kind than we understood." The elder with violet eyes nodded. "We will not make a decision yet. You will remain here until we know more. But know this, human. If you prove to be a threat, we will not hesitate to take action." Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't show his fear. He had survived many things before, and he would survive this, too. The aliens were powerful, but he wasn't going down without a fight. He had made it this far, and he would make it even further. As the elders turned and left the hall, Zira stayed behind, her gaze lingering on Ethan. She said nothing at first, but finally she spoke, her voice softer now. "I believe you, human. There is something about you. We will see if you truly are what you claim to be." Ethan nodded, relieved that at least one of them believed him. The future was still uncertain, but for now, he had earned a small victory. Ethan woke up early the next morning, the sky outside the alien city still dark with the first light of dawn. His sleep had been restless, his mind racing with thoughts of the elders and their decision. He had spoken honestly, told them about humanity's ways, but now the true test would begin. The alien women were powerful, far stronger than any human he'd ever met, and they were watching him carefully. He could feel the weight of their expectations bearing down on him. As he stepped outside the small shelter provided for him, he saw Zira waiting for him. She stood with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable, but her eyes glimmered with something that looked like challenge. Ethan straightened his back and approached her, unsure of what to expect next. "Today, you will prove yourself," Zira said, her voice firm but not unkind. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Prove myself? How?" Zira's lips curled into a small smile. "You will face one of our warriors, a test of strength, to see if you truly have the will to survive here. This is how we measure your worth." Ethan's stomach tightened. He had known this was coming. He had expected some kind of trial, but hearing Zira say it out loud made it feel more real and much more daunting. The warrior women were known for their incredible strength, their unmatched skills in combat. Ethan didn't have the advantage of size or power. He was human, but he had something else, something that had helped him survive his entire life. Determination. He nodded, trying to hide his nervousness. "I'm ready." Zira led him to an open area at the edge of the settlement, where a group of women were gathered around a large training ring. The dirt was packed hard from years of practice, and the air was thick with the scent of sweat and effort. Ethan's heart raced in his chest as he saw the woman who would be his opponent. She was tall, taller than Zira, and her muscles were defined with strength. Her armor glinted in the early light, and her eyes were focused, fierce. She looked at Ethan with a slight tilt of her head, as if studying him. There was no doubt she was a seasoned warrior, ready to take him down without a second thought. Zira stepped forward and spoke to the gathered warriors, her voice loud and clear. "This human is not like us, but he has claimed he can survive, that he has strength of his own. We will see if he truly does." Ethan's mind raced. He had no idea what kind of combat they expected. These were warrior women, trained for years, probably since they were children. He had no training, no experience. But the thought of backing down wasn't an option. He couldn't let them think that humans were weak. The warrior opposite him stepped forward, her stance calm but confident. Zira called out, "The fight will be simple. No weapons, just you and her, one-on-one. Only until one submits." Ethan barely had time to react before the warrior lunged at him. He barely managed to duck, the warrior's arm whooshing through the air where his head had been just a moment before. His heart was pounding, adrenaline surging through his veins. He didn't have the luxury of overthinking. He had to act quickly. The warrior lunged again, this time grabbing his shoulder and throwing him to the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of him, and for a moment, all he could hear was the ringing in his ears. He blinked, trying to focus, but the warrior was already on top of him, her knee pressing into his chest. He could feel the weight of her, the power she was using to pin him down. But instead of panicking, something inside him clicked. He remembered what Zira had said. "You survive with your mind, not just your strength." Ethan's mind raced. His hand searched for something, anything he could use. His fingers brushed against the dirt, finding a small stone. Without thinking, he used it to push against her armor, leveraging his body weight. He didn't have the power to fight her head-on, but he could use his environment. With a sudden push, he managed to shift his position just enough to break her grip. His heart was still racing, his breath coming in sharp bursts, but he scrambled to his feet. He couldn't stand still. If he stayed in one place, he was done for. The warrior growled in frustration, but she didn't rush at him again. Instead, she watched him closely, her eyes narrowing. Ethan's mind raced as he tried to figure out his next move. He wasn't used to fighting like this. He wasn't trained, but he knew he couldn't afford to hesitate. He had to keep moving. In a blur of motion, he darted to the side, using his agility to get out of her direct line of attack. He had to tire her out, make her miss. His strategy wasn't about overpowering her. It was about outsmarting her. The warrior lunged again, but this time, Ethan was ready. He ducked, dodging the blow and pushing her off balance. She stumbled for a moment, giving him just enough time to grab her arm and twist it behind her back. There was a moment of stunned silence. The warrior grunted, trying to break free, but she didn't. Ethan held firm, using every ounce of his strength and leverage. He wasn't going to win by force, but by persistence. Zira stepped forward, watching closely. "Enough," she said. The warrior huffed in frustration, but she stepped back, giving Ethan a nod of respect. It was clear she was impressed, though she didn't speak. Ethan breathed heavily, sweat dripping from his forehead. He had done it. He had survived. Zira approached him, her expression unreadable. "You have proven yourself today, human," she said. "You are more than I thought." Ethan looked at her, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I told you, humans are survivors." After the fight, Ethan felt a strange shift in the air. The warrior women no longer saw him as just an outsider. Something in their eyes had changed. They no longer looked at him with suspicion or doubt, but with something else, respect. Ethan was aware of how dangerous these women could be, but somehow he had earned their acknowledgement. Zira approached him after the match, her face expressionless, but her eyes held a new kind of understanding. "You did well," she said, her voice steady. "You proved that your people have strength, different from ours, but strength nonetheless." Ethan wiped the sweat off his brow, trying to catch his breath. "I didn't think it would be so intense," he admitted, his heart still pounding. "But I've seen humans face tougher odds and come out stronger." Zira gave him a small nod. "I see that now. You are not like us, but you are resilient." The words meant more than Ethan expected. The respect he'd gained from the warrior women was something he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about strength anymore. It was about something deeper, a recognition of what it meant to be human, to survive, to never give up, no matter the odds. As the day passed, Ethan spent more time with Zira and the others. The women of the warrior tribe were fierce and dedicated, but they were also curious about Ethan. He could feel their eyes on him often, studying him, wondering what made him tick. That evening, they sat around a campfire. The firelight flickered against their faces, casting shadows that made the women look even more formidable. But there was something peaceful about the atmosphere, something that allowed Ethan to relax, if only for a moment. Zira leaned forward, her gaze still fixed on him. "Tell us more about your world," she asked, her tone soft, but her curiosity clear. "Your people, how do you live? What are your ways?" Ethan took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Humans are a lot like you in some ways. We live in communities, work together, and fight for survival when we have to. But we don't always have the same strengths. Our strength is in our ability to adapt. We find new ways to solve problems, to survive, and to grow." Zira listened intently, her expression thoughtful. "Adapt," she repeated. "You do not rely only on strength, then?" Ethan shook his head. "No, we rely on our minds just as much, if not more. We learn from our mistakes and always try to find a way forward, no matter what obstacles we face." The women around the fire nodded in understanding. It seemed that slowly but surely, Ethan was earning their respect not just for his physical abilities, but for the values that made humans who they were. It was a lesson in patience, something that, until now, he hadn't realized was part of survival too. As the night deepened, Zira shared more about her people. They were a warrior race, proud and strong, but they had their struggles too. They were bound by tradition, their way of life rooted in rules that had been followed for generations. Yet Zira seemed to be questioning some of those rules. Maybe it was the way Ethan had stood up to the warrior women, or maybe it was something else, but she began to open up in a way Ethan hadn't expected. "You know," Zira said quietly, staring into the fire, "we have always been taught that strength is the most important thing. But I wonder, is it really?" Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What do you mean?" She looked up at him, her eyes serious. "I see what you do. You think before you act. You don't always fight with brute force. I think your people might have something to teach us." Ethan felt a strange warmth in his chest. "I think there's a lot we could learn from each other." There was a long silence as the group of women continued to look at him, their faces reflecting the flickering light of the fire. For the first time since his arrival on this strange planet, Ethan felt a connection to these people. They were different, yes, but their strength, their curiosity, and their desire to grow were things he could understand. Zira's voice broke the silence. "Tomorrow, you will come with us to the outer regions. There are dangers there, wild creatures that we must keep in check. I will teach you our ways of defense." Ethan nodded. "I'm ready." Zira's lips twitched into a small, approving smile. "Good. But remember, it's not just about strength. It's about knowing when to fight and when to listen." Ethan thought about those words as the night wore on. He had spent his life fighting, surviving, and adapting. But maybe, just maybe, the real strength came from knowing when to stop fighting and start understanding. The next morning, they set off at dawn. The group of warrior women, including Zira, led the way through the dense alien forests, with Ethan following behind. He wasn't sure what awaited them, but he knew one thing for sure: his journey was far from over. The bond between him and the warrior women was growing stronger, and each day he was learning more about them and about himself. The morning sun had just begun to rise, casting golden rays through the alien trees. The air was thick with the scent of unfamiliar plants, their leaves swaying gently in the breeze. Ethan walked alongside Zira, trying to match her pace as they ventured deeper into the wilderness. The other warrior women moved in silence, their eyes sharp and watchful, always alert to the slightest sound. Zira had told him the day before that they were heading to the outer regions, a dangerous place full of wild creatures and harsh conditions. As they walked, Ethan felt the weight of the journey ahead. It wasn't just about surviving the wilderness. It was about proving himself to these women. He had already gained their respect in battle, but that wasn't enough. Now it was time to show that he could earn their trust. "Stay close," Zira said, her voice low but firm. "This is no place for hesitation." Ethan nodded. He had learned quickly that hesitation was a luxury he couldn't afford on this planet. The warrior women were experts in survival, and he had to be just as sharp if he wanted to keep up with them. As they moved deeper into the forest, the trees began to thin out, revealing a wide open plain. In the distance, Ethan could see the outline of a large, dark shape moving across the land. Zira raised a hand, signaling for everyone to stop. "There it is," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A pterosaur." Ethan squinted into the distance. The creature was massive, its silhouette resembling a giant lizard, with sharp, glistening scales and piercing eyes. The pterosaur was known for its ferocity. It was a predator that no one dared approach unless they were ready to fight for their lives. "We need to move quickly," Zira continued. "We will wait for the right moment to strike." Ethan's heart began to race. This was the test. He had heard stories about the pterosaur, about how it could tear through anything in its path. But now, here it was, only a few hundred yards away. He had no choice but to trust Zira and the warrior women to guide him through this. Zira's eyes locked onto him, and she gave him a quick nod. "Do not act on impulse," she warned. "Trust your instincts, but follow our lead." Ethan took a deep breath and steadied his nerves. He had faced dangerous situations before, but this was different. These women had spent their entire lives training for moments like this. They were the experts, and now he had to become one of them. Without a word, the group began to move in unison, silently creeping through the tall grass toward the pterosaur. Every step was calculated, every movement precise. Ethan felt the weight of his decision. He wasn't just following them anymore. He was part of the team. If he failed, it wouldn't be just his life at risk. It would be the lives of everyone around him. As they drew closer to the creature, Zira suddenly raised her hand again, signaling for everyone to stop. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he crouched low to the ground, his eyes never leaving the pterosaur. The creature was sniffing the air, unaware of their presence. It was a dangerous advantage, but they had to make their move soon. Zira spoke quietly, her voice barely audible. "We'll surround it. Take it down together." The warrior women split into smaller groups, surrounding the pterosaur on all sides. Ethan followed Zira's lead, moving silently into position. His mind raced, analyzing every possible scenario. He had no weapons of his own, nothing but his instincts to guide him. Finally, Zira gave the signal. With a loud, sharp whistle, the women lunged forward, attacking the pterosaur from every angle. Ethan followed suit, grabbing a large branch from the ground and swinging it at the creature's flank. The pterosaur let out a deafening roar, thrashing violently as the women attacked. It was clear that the creature wasn't going to go down easily. Ethan's heart raced as he fought to keep up, swinging the branch with all his strength, hitting the creature in the side. His strike was weak compared to the others, but it was enough to distract the pterosaur for a moment. Zira darted in, her spear striking the creature's neck with incredible precision. The pterosaur staggered back, blood pouring from the wound, but it was far from finished. In one last desperate act, it lunged toward Zira, its jaws snapping. Without thinking, Ethan rushed forward. He couldn't let her fall, not after everything they had been through. With a swift movement, he jumped onto the creature's back, using all his weight to push it off balance. The pterosaur screeched, its massive body flailing wildly, but Ethan held on, using his legs to squeeze tighter around its torso. Zira, seeing the opportunity, raised her spear once more and drove it deep into the pterosaur's skull. The creature let out one final scream before collapsing, its massive body falling limp. Panting and covered in sweat, Ethan slid off the pterosaur's back. He was exhausted, his body aching, but there was a strange feeling of accomplishment swelling inside him. He had fought beside the warrior women, not just as an outsider, but as a teammate. Zira approached him, her expression unreadable. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, slowly, Zira extended her hand toward him. "You did well," she said, her voice soft but sincere. "You fought with honor." Ethan shook her hand, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "I'm just getting started." The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the landscape as Ethan stood by the edge of the forest. He was exhausted, his body sore from the battle with the pterosaur, but there was a sense of pride in his chest. He had fought with the warrior women, and together they had overcome a dangerous predator. For the first time since he arrived on this alien world, he felt like he truly belonged. Zira stood beside him, her expression serious but thoughtful. Her eyes scanned the horizon, her sharp senses ever alert. The other women were behind them, securing the area and preparing to move out. The mission was far from over, and the pterosaur was only the beginning. "We've come a long way," Zira said, her voice low. "But there's still much more to prove." Ethan nodded, his mind racing with everything they had been through. The fight had been intense, but there was a bigger challenge ahead. He had seen the way the warrior women looked at him now, different than before. It wasn't just curiosity anymore, it was respect. But respect alone wouldn't be enough. He needed to show them that he was more than just a survivor. He needed to show them that he could be an equal. "I'm ready," Ethan said firmly. "What's next?" Zira glanced at him, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "We move deeper into the territory. There are more dangers ahead, but if we face them together, we will succeed." The group gathered their weapons and supplies, preparing to journey into the heart of the alien world. As they walked, the air grew colder, and the trees grew denser, their trunks twisted in strange, unnatural shapes. Ethan felt the weight of the journey ahead. This was no longer just about survival. It was about proving that humanity had something to offer this world, something worth fighting for. Zira led the way, her steps confident and sure. The warrior women followed closely, their movements synchronized like a well-oiled machine. Ethan kept pace with them, his mind focused on the task at hand. He had already learned so much from them: how to fight, how to survive, how to think in the heat of battle. But there was still much more to understand. As they walked, Zira spoke again. "There is something different about you, Ethan. You're not like the others we've encountered. Your spirit is strong." Ethan glanced at her, surprised by her words. "I'm just a human. I don't know what makes me different." Zira's gaze softened, and for a moment, she seemed almost kind. "You may be human, but you fight with honor. And that's something we respect." A wave of warmth spread through Ethan at her words. He had been through so much in this strange world, but he had never felt truly accepted until now. He realized that the warrior women saw him not as an outsider, but as someone who could stand beside them in battle. The group continued their trek, moving through the thick underbrush and uneven terrain. It wasn't long before they came across another challenge. A massive river stretched out before them, its waters rushing with incredible force. On the other side, the dark silhouette of a towering mountain range loomed, the final destination of their journey. "We need to cross," Zira said, her voice steady despite the danger ahead. "The river is swift, but there's a narrow pass just upstream." Ethan studied the river, the water churning violently. It would be dangerous to cross, but there was no other way forward. The warrior women seemed unfazed, their determination unwavering. "Let's do it," Ethan said, his voice filled with resolve. He wasn't about to back down now, not after everything they had been through together. Zira nodded, and the group moved into action. The women worked together seamlessly, forming a human chain to steady themselves as they crossed the treacherous waters. Ethan followed closely behind, using his strength to help steady the others. The current was fierce, but they were stronger when they worked together. With every step, Ethan felt more connected to them, not just as a fighter, but as a teammate. He wasn't just proving himself to them anymore. He was proving something to himself, that he too could stand tall in this alien world. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they made it across the river. The women's faces were set with determination, their focus unshaken. Ethan looked at them in awe. These women were warriors, true warriors, but now they had seen him as one of their own. They had seen his strength, his will to survive, and most importantly, his loyalty. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a blanket of stars across the sky, Zira stopped and turned to Ethan. "You've earned your place among us," she said, her voice firm, but not unkind. Ethan smiled, feeling a weight lift from his chest. "I'm just getting started," he replied. The journey was far from over, but for the first time since arriving on this alien world, Ethan felt like he had truly found a new home, a place where trust, respect, and courage meant something. And together, with the warrior women by his side, there was nothing they couldn't overcome.